Yeah, I actually studied the history of the wars on drugs in Central and South America at university as part of my history degree. It's something
Yeah,
I've
right.
always been interested in, and the transition towards legalization of cannabis first of all, and other things later on, seems to me one of the sort of more certain trends for the decades to come, because it makes so much sense in terms of I guess reassessing or starting to properly understand the nature of addiction and the nature of drugs. And I think if people look into it, that's sort of the inevitable conclusion that you come to, is that the history of the war on drugs and the way that things stand today is not for reasons of sort of helping people or doing the right thing. It's grounded in much baser instincts and has led to very bad outcomes. And I think
Mm.
the mainstream misconception now is that the sort of drugs are bad or they're dangerous or they're associated with crime. But if you think that in America, I saw recently a colleague of ours, Dan Denning, over in the States, he shared that a new record was broken in America recently, which is that 100,000 people died from fentanyl, which is a prescribed painkiller. And I recently read the book Empire of Pain by Patrick Rallian Keefe. It just won the Bailey Gifford Book Prize for this year. It's an absolutely outstanding work on Purdue Pharma and the beginnings of the opioid crisis in America, which is a prescription painkiller epidemic that, is like one of the largest killers of people in, the great land of the free America, whose life expectancy I think has declined in the last 10 years. It's so bad. So the concept that these incredibly deadly, addictive, aggressive drugs are being not just legalized but commercially marketed to a population in America, and something like cannabis, which actually might have a lot of beneficial properties, um, is being outlawed. It doesn't match up, and I think that is something that will get redressed in the years and decades to come, albeit slowly. And the second thing is really the aspect of investing that I like the most, and I think that's the psychology. And as you described, the incredible sort of run up and bubble, the way that sort of crowd psychology works in investment is that people feed off each other and get more and more excited and drive things to short-term extremes. And then when those extremes are reached, the pendulum doesn't just swing back slowly towards the middle and sort of track the growth of the industry in a reasonable way. It overshoots. It goes way too bearish, way too fearful. People completely give up on it. And it's been a sort of microcosm of an investment cycle with cannabis in the last 5 years of massive exuberance, a peak, a crash, and then a complete sort of lack of interest and ignorance. And that is where the opportunity lies. And I think the way that crowds do drive markets in that way is so interesting. And if you can be contrarian, if you can be counter cyclical in that way, the opportunities for cannabis are not just huge. They're right now. I mean, there's a few things starting to come out. And the way the capital cycle works is those crashes, they clear out the worst companies, and the ones that survive are they're better capitalized, they're more resilient. You know that they're well managed because only the well managed companies survive that kind of crash. And yeah, so this is a great time, I think, to be looking. You will know, I think it's pretty clear to everyone listening, much more about the technicalities of the industry, about the value chain, about the
Yeah.
opportunities in terms of specifics. But in terms of the sort of broad picture, that's definitely how I see it. And yeah, it's not a few year trend, it's a multi decade trend for me.
Yeah, the interesting thing about the European market with this certainly is that it seems to be really building on a sort of gold standard quality over quantity approach to things. So the thing with like Canada and the way they went about it is that they kind of ran before they could walk. In terms of you had these huge amounts of production, and you didn't necessarily have the immediate market that they expected that there would probably be for that. Uh, so it kind of it did the market kind of jumped the gun a little bit on that. That doesn't mean to say that a lot of the companies that have come from this, that are big, big multinational companies listed in, Canada and the US are bad. Some of them are real quality companies, but it just means that the kind of market has now kind of got a bit of a bad smell about it, for lack of a better phrase. The investors kind of look at it and go, "Oh, that bubble's kind of come and gone." They're not really looking at it from this multi-year, multi-decade perspective, where there's a considerable change coming in atmosphere around the use of cannabis medicinally and recreationally. And interesting, you mentioned about the book that you'd read, and the opioid crisis, which has clearly become a thing. I even just noticed, on Apple Plus, the Apple streaming service, there's, or was it Disney? Maybe it's Disney. Maybe it's Disney. I can't remember. It's one of those big new streaming services. There's like a new show called Dope Sick, which is all about, I think, the opioid crisis, or big pharma and the the way that they knowingly kind of market these very addictive and ultimately deadly drugs to the people in the US in particular. And the research into cannabis, particularly around therapeutic and medicinal use, around pain management, pain relief, um, and a whole bunch of other different potential use cases, is it's exciting. It's phenomenal stuff, really, when you see how beneficial it can be. And so you've got this entire market of big pharma that is worth unbelievable amount of wealth that effectively I think is going to radically change as we see things like a TV series on a major streaming channel start to open people's eyes and minds to the fact that this opioid crisis uh, is a serious thing, and that it has to change, and that one of the ways out of that is through new novel approaches to drugs like cannabis. But we don't talk about it in the terms of drugs like we do heroin. It is not the same as something like heroin. We're talking about it in terms of drugs, as in the potential to help people manage disease and illness, and live more comfortable, but healthier lifestyles. So that's just one aspect of it. And so what we're seeing with Germany, the German market, and there's other production centers around Europe. The European market is really starting to flourish and to grow. And I think we're going to see, I think 2022 should be an interesting year again for cannabis companies, particularly in the UK, listing in the UK and in Europe. And so it's certainly an area of focus. I've never really dropped. I've been looking at this market for probably the last 5 years now, almost 6 years, because it's starting to branch out to Australia and Asia, and as I say, Europe and the US and Canada are sort of well down that track as well. And there's just so many facets to it. It's such an interesting and exciting area. Once you kind of open your mind and break past that whole couple of spliffs in my pocket kind of nonsense. So I think once people get their head around that and realize that it's there's so much more to it, then we'll all be better off for it. So yeah, it's an exciting sector. What's happening in Germany is really going to give us a good guideline as to how Europe and the UK and this whole region over here can really utilize this as a major market opportunity.